Alistair, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Jeff, as a precursor to the question that I'd like to ask over here, many of the technologies on the right-hand side I personally work with. And I've watched it. I've been in technology for 20 plus years odd. And what I've noticed specifically with AI, we used to see like Moore's law of 18 months. Today, AI has become the granddaddy, which is its capability because of data and computing power doubles every 3 months, which is insane. So the capability of that combined with things like IoT and blockchain at the same time, not just for like immutable records, but the convergence of those technologies together. I've watched, and this is not scripted on like what I wanted to ask, but watching that in the past 12 months has been like, the word exponential is not correct. I thought I used to understand what might come in the future, but I don't. It's just moving so fast. And I guess, given that, it's the equivalent of creating the fastest deflationary opportunity in the history of humankind, which is the precursor to this question is, how can we harness some of those statements I've made to create abundance of opportunity in Africa?
So it's so funny that you said that. So you just tied into a whole bunch of same themes, because I sit in an intersection of this all the time, and it is moving. It's impossible to comprehend how fast things are moving. It's all in AI. It's almost frightening. If you took the other side, it's advancing so fast, and business doesn't come from one of these technologies alone. Typically, it doesn't come from, okay, I created an AI company. There's not really such thing as an AI company. It comes together with another thing that what an entrepreneur sees is, wait, this type of technology with this over here creates something entirely new. And it's that orthogonal thinking that creates the something new that changes the existing incumbent can't compete with. And you touched on another thing. It's massively deflationary. It brings prices down at a level that we can't even comprehend. If you look at your phone, everything's free on your phone. Why do you use that technology? Is because you get abundance for almost nothing. And people assume that the phone and say all those apps that are free because they're paid advertising, and it's not true. An app on a phone, you write a line of code for a flashlight on your phone, and you never have to write a line of code again, and it scales infinitely. It's free. And the point of technology is to free our time. And we've lived in a monetary policy forever that is trying to increase prices against that free. So if you effectively ask Alistair, the reason I wrote my book is because nobody was putting those pieces together. And so so if you try to print money into something that the world, if innovation and this rate of change in technology should be making everything cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and things to the point of free, most things would be free. But when economic policy stops that from happening, or we say we want more growth, but we don't realize growth today with this picture that you just put up, growth today is negative. That's what the entrepreneurs are doing. They're driving, information is moving to be free. And we're building new, essentially, instead of roads and bridges, the super highways or information highways. And on top of that, it becomes free, almost free. And the entrepreneurs if you look at every single monopoly company that you use, that I use, and everything else, forget in different regions, but I'm talking tech companies, we celebrate prices coming down all the time. That's why we use Google, because it's free. That's why we use Amazon, because the products get cheaper and cheaper, and we have abundance of any product we want, and then we get next day shipping, and then we add movies for free or almost free. So that's the point of technology, and that mindset is a very different mindset than how we built the world over the last 100 years.
Perfect. Thanks, Jeff. I would normally follow up with quite a few questions on that, which is leading for good opportunity in Africa. But if we can just chat about, On the previous slide, I chatted about a few technologies. There are maybe 25, 30, in fact, I think it goes up to 100 exponential technologies that are sitting out there today they're both exploding and converging at the same time. And what might be super useful is for people on the call to understand, like, what are we looking out for? If you're an entrepreneur in Africa and you have access to this and you can put this in the hands of people, such as those on the call, what should we look out for in terms of, there are many exponential technologies out there, and you can't just absorb all of them, and you can't just use everything that you see out there. We're typically used to seeing, like, pick a problem and then you solve the problem and then you wrap technologies around that, and you wrap multiple technologies. But it would be super useful to understand from you, like, what is an exponential technology and why is it so important today and not like 5 years ago?
Yeah, so all of these are moving at a rate so forecasting the rate of change and when something becomes commercially viable. So let's take energy as an example, because I think it's important. I just heard just before this call that you sometimes have blackouts or an ability. So it obviously seems like a problem that everybody's waiting for government to solve and everything. And energy, an important part of the whole process of what we just talked about before about that deflation and driving better value is economic viability. And so something has to reach economic viability. And ultimately, typically in technology companies, the startup needs a 10 times advantage versus the incumbent to be able to break monopoly power. So it needs to have a really big advantage. And so you're forecasting those advantages against an exponential path of price declines against technology. But if you just looked at energy today, so most energy is not around solar today, but solar is now one of the cheapest energy sources, and it's declining every year. And so if you're forecasting that decline and saying, wait, there's a problem here and it's because of a grid, the grid might look differently later. The entire grid could be more localized and around solar and backup. And so those create opportunities. Energy is the number one input of every other industry. So a whole bunch of other industries don't work because energy cost is too high. Take desalination. Probably pretty important for regions in Africa. Doesn't work or it's economically unviable. But combine lower cost energy, it changes that formula, and it opens up a whole bunch of other industries as a byproduct. And each of these and your other 100 similarly, it's hard to go into all of these, but what I would say is I'm staggered by how many opportunities there are. I cannot keep track. I can't keep up to the time, even my own time in companies asking me to be on boards that in some cases I want to say yes because they're so incredible and everything else. And I have to, there's just not enough time because there's just so much happening right now.
Thank you, Jeff. It doesn't have to be answered now because we're going to hand over to the next person. But as an entrepreneur, if you see, for example, government and public sector is moving super slow, we would probably want to find a way that we can work faster than them and get past that, like, slowdown mechanism, if there's a way, which is kind of part of what that question was. Perhaps not for now, but just to plant a thought there in terms of how might we elegantly work with government, but faster than those structures.
So, and I can answer it really quickly because it ties into one of the last questions. You lead, and you force a change because of leading, and because the market starts to understand, wow, this is important, and the same thing you're doing with investors and everything else, how important this idea is, and then along the way, governments typically come on side and help, but they need to see a lead first from typically private industry. That's essentially governments move when there's enough backlash from community. They have to move.
Thank you, Jeff. Super valuable.